Before we jump into today's discussion, please take a moment to rate us on Spotify, Apple Music, wherever you listen to your podcasts.
We really appreciate you doing that. And also, please remember to tell your friends about us. In 2017, a young black woman named Deven Grey shot and killed her abusive white boyfriend in a trailer in rural Shelby, Alabama.
It could have been a stand your ground claim, and she could have been let off with no charges.
Instead, she took a blind plea and was sent to prison.
Why did this happen? And how did Deven Grey even end up in that trailer in rural Alabama?
We're going to preview the podcast Blind Plea on this episode of So Much Crime.
So Little Time.
Welcome to So Much Crime, So Little Time. I'm Jeff.
And I'm Dee. In this episode, we'll introduce you to Blind Plea, a podcast from Lemonada Media and Evoke Media.
After that, we'll tackle a true crime question of the week. This one comes from one of our loyal listeners.
If you haven't listened to Blind Plea yet, that's perfect.
This is one of our preview episodes where we're only going to introduce you to the podcast and cover parts of the very first episode.
There will be no spoilers for what's to come.
You'll also find a link to Blind Plea in our show notes if you want to go check that out.
In our next episode, we'll discuss the whole series.
But right now, let's discuss if this is a crime that's worth your time. All right, Dee, before we get to talking about Blind Plea, let us hop in the time machine. So this crime takes place in 2017, specifically December 12th of 2017. Do you remember anything about 2017?
2017. Yeah, we were having our first Christmas in our new house.
Where in the world?
That's
were
all
you?
I remember.
Yeah.
In Dublin.
In Dublin. Okay. All right. Well, if you went to the movies, you got to see a very polarizing movie. 3 days after this crime occurred on December 15th, 2017, it is one of the most polarizing installments from a long-running series. Some people love it. Some people hate it. Any idea where I'm going with this?
Are we Star Warsing?
We are Star Warsing. That's pretty good.
Is it the first one? The one that they went back and were like, this is the first
Nope.
guy? Nope.
This is the second
I mean,
one.
that's all I have. I got
right.
Star Wars. Did I not win?
No.
Did I win nothing for getting Star Wars?
No, that doesn't count. It was The Last Jedi. So the Rian Johnson directed middle one from the, I guess you'd call it the third trilogy, episode 8. So anyway, all right, that came out on December 15th. A couple of songs for you. So Post Malone was at the top of the charts, but I was actually more interested in what was the second song on the charts, which is a song called Havana. You remember that song?
Havana, na, na, na. How could you forget that song?
It's like the most earwormy of earworm songs.
I know, but I feel like it's earwormy without like getting annoying. Like, do you know the Fox song? What did the fox say? Like, that's an earworm song, but like it's so annoying. Whereas Havana na 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 is not annoying. Like it's a good tune to have in your head, I think.
I think we've just gotten 2 songs stuck in everyone's head, so thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Before we move off the time machine, I wanted to add one more element to this, something we haven't done before, which is, so this crime takes place in Calera, Alabama. And in the same way that we try with the time machine to sort of precede getting to some sometimes very dark things, we want to talk about some more positive things, some happier things that kind of also place us in the time. We also want to place ourselves in the location. So I went to TripAdvisor and looked up what are some of the nice things from this part of Alabama. And I have 2 things for you. The first is there is a railroad museum. The Heart of Dixie Railroad Museum is the top attraction in the area. Have you ever been to a railroad museum?
No, but I actually think you told me about going to one on our way up north. I can't remember where we were going.
Sacramento.
Is there?
Yeah, if you're going to...
Yeah, is there one just past Sacramento?
It's in Sacramento. If you're ever in California's lovely capital of Sacramento, there is a wonderful train museum that I highly recommend. But this Heart of Dixie Railroad Museum looks similar in that it's a museum full of trains. So, and then the top restaurant is the Tin Top Barbecue, which...
Tin Top.
Tin Top. And a couple fun
Does
facts.
it have a tin top?
I don't know. I did look at a picture of it. I didn't check what type of metal the roof was made from. It is known for banana pudding. Do you have a stance on banana pudding?
I don't know what that is.
It's a pudding with bananas, a lot of sugar.
Like, is it like banana bread?
No. Okay, we were talking, I think, more like an American pudding versus like a English pudding. So, I'm losing you.
Oh, it's like a cake just with lots of bananas all the way through it.
Well, no, I think it's actually like made of pudding. Like
like you keep saying the word pudding as if I know what it is.
Pudding's more like a custard.
Oh, okay.
More creamy, less bread.
Oh, I see some.
Okay. The best part of this podcast is when
have-
Dee Googles things and we all get to
so that everyone can see. I don't have feelings towards this.
Okay.
Tin top looks like it has a tin top though.
That's good to know.
No, it doesn't.
Oh my gosh.
It doesn't. Sorry.
This is quickly going off the rails. I have one more thing about the Tin Top Barbecue. One of their main barbecue items are pig wings.
Pigs don't have wings.
I guess in Alabama they do. I have never had a pig wing, but I looked it up. They look pretty good. I mean, buffaloes don't have wings, but buffalo wings are great.
It's a fair point, well made.
All right, let's move on. Should we move on?
Yeah, I wonder, should we try and read some like good or bad reviews? You know how we do that in book club.
I didn't think of that, but let's do it next time.
There's one here that I have about the tin top. Drove a fair amount out of our way to get some of those ribs everyone was talking about, and it turns out they're closed on Sunday.
Oh,
Posted hours would have been helpful. That's a terrible one.
Yeah, that's tragic.
Well, that was the only 1-star review. That's pretty good. Good job, Tin Top.
All right. If we're ever in Calera, Alabama, going to get some pig wings and banana pudding.
I'm not promising anything.
But the Railroad Museum.
That sounds like something my kids would enjoy.
All right. Can we jump out of the time machine? Are we just watching you read TripAdvisor reviews?
Yeah, I'm reading TripAdvisor reviews. People are assholes on TripAdvisor.
That's really the moral of the story. Wait, read the Goodreads reviews. All right.
Yeah. All right, Jeff. Let us give an overview of Blind Plea. It came out in 2023. There are 11 episodes. Most are about 40 to 45 minutes long.
The host is Liz Flock. She is an Emmy Award-winning journalist and writer. She has written for a bunch of places, including PBS NewsHour, New York Times, New Yorker. She's also written some books. One of her most recent books is called The Furies, Women, Vengeance, and Justice. This is a book about women who used violence to protect themselves when the police and the courts failed them. So similar theme in some of her other writing.
Very interesting. So what is the story? So the first episode introduces us to Deven Grey. We hear the 911 call the night she killed her boyfriend, John Vance. We hear a bit about how she was from upstate New York and travelled with John to Alabama, where he lived as a kid.
Then there's a lot about some of the various red flags in their relationship, lots of stuff about abuse that kind of led up to Deven killing John in 2017. We also hear from Sheila, who is John's aunt, and the story about how John's grandmother had killed her abusive husband 40 years ago before this crime in 2017 on the same property. So in the same place, there was a very similar crime. So, all right, Dee, let's jump into it. I guess we usually start initial thoughts on the host. So the host here is Liz Flock. What'd you think of her?
I thought she did a really great job. I really liked her. I often say how it takes me a little while to warm up to a host. But I didn't really get that with Liz. I don't know whether it's because she is so, obviously she's Emmy Award-winning journalist. She's so, but she didn't seem too polished either.
Yeah.
I didn't end my sentence there. I am aware. She is so something, but she wasn't too polished. Like we've seen previously how we feel sometimes a host is so polished that they seem cold. I felt like Liz was able to really balance fact, opinion, like bringing in her personal life and also the storytelling.
Yeah. Yeah, she notes that she herself experienced abuse in the past, but I agree. I think she does it in a way that isn't intrusive on the story. I think she's still very respectful of the story. She's very present as a narrator. Like we've listened to other ones where the narrator in the first episode isn't very present, but she is. I think she's kind of all over this one. But it's not just like Black Girl Gone, where it's just a the narrator's voice throughout the whole thing. This one we are interspersed with clips like the 911 call and some interviews. So I feel like it's a nice balance. I think it's put together well, and I agree. I think she comes off as that nice mix of very professional, very like kind of a sober presentation of the facts, but also there's like just a little bit of her personality in there that I think that adds to the story.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I know you noted that Liz mentions that she was a victim of abuse previously herself. And I really feel that adds to the vulnerability and the emotion of the episode, but also of her storytelling. It adds another layer. And I feel like in episode 1, you really hear some underlying emotion that's coming through. It's very soft. It's not overpowering. As you said, she doesn't take over the story at all. It's just done very well.
I will say, I think strongly net positive, in my opinion, of how she handles this first episode. I think one thing that maybe, wouldn't say surprised me, or maybe like something that I was concerned of going in, was this seems ostensibly to be a story about race. Right. On some level, it's about a black woman who kills a white man in rural Alabama, which is a place that has a long history of racism. I mean, America does. Like that's not.
And in Shelby County, which is apparently one of the, what did they say? One of the most racist counties? I don't know if that's true. They said something along those lines.
Yeah. So Shelby County is the county in Alabama that basically was involved in the Supreme Court case that overturned the Voting Rights Act. So this happened around the time of this crime. This was in the 2010s. And this really like
when Deven actually moved there.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, there's other things about Alabama that are alluded to here, or things, I can't remember if these things are alluded to, or things that I just know from like Alabama was the last state to allow interracial marriage. They were the holdout. They were the last holdout to formally allow interracial couples to get married. Which this is a story about an interracial couple. And I think so. Like, what I was trying to say there earlier was, I think, it maybe more like so Liz Flock herself is a white woman. Is this a white woman's story to tell, or would this story be better served with a person of color narrating it? So that was a concern I had. I think she handles it really, from my perspective. I think she handles it really well, but that was something that maybe stood out to me.
I understand where you're coming from with that comment. My only thought is that Liz is a survivor of violence, and so does that not make this story, could it not be argued that that's like that? I would assume that is one of the strongest reasons why she wanted to do this podcast. Oh,
absolutely. Absolutely. I don't want to imply that I don't think she should be telling this story. I think she absolutely, it's totally her right to do so. I do wonder if this would be told a little differently if it was narrated by, or reported on by, a person of color. Not that she can't do it. It was something that occurred to me.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I'd like to come back to that maybe in the full recap, if to see if that is something that you still feel by the end of it.
Yeah.
Because in fact, one of the tiny criticisms, I don't even think it's not a criticism, it's more of a question that I would love to hear how other people felt about it, is from episode 1, from the get-go, it is very clear how Liz Flock feels about Deven.
That's interesting.
and how Liz Flock feels about the situation in question. And not my opinion, but a question that came to mind was, when we are looking for someone to tell a story in a podcast, there's lots of different ways you can tell it. And one element of this podcast that I feel we are seeing in episode 1 is a clear bias of the storyteller. Not bias, a clear leaning of the storyteller towards Deven Grey. I am not saying that that is an incorrect lean. It's not the way to lean. I am saying that there is no doubt from the start that Deven Grey shot and killed someone. And I just thought it was interesting how much we get that Liz was leaning on Deven's side.
That's interesting. That did occur to me. I think for half a second I wonder, like, is there a version of the story that is more sort of like balanced? Right?
Yeah.
Like,
I think that's what I was trying to say, and you just said it in like way less words.
but is there, like, does that version exist, or should that version exist? I don't know that it should, right? Like, I think because there's a couple of like clear facts. Yes, she shot her boyfriend. She seemingly shot him not in the midst of an active argument, right? Like they had been
was asleep.
They had been fighting. He had been abusing her significantly. And then he goes to sleep and she picks up a gun and shoots him. Those are the facts. She admits to those facts on the 911 call. Right? And I guess there's a way.
There is a version of the story where it's not as sympathetic towards Deven.
And maybe this is my own bias. I have a hard time seeing that version of the story. And you're right. Like, of course, my perspective on this is shaped by Liz Flock's presentation here, the way she presents it. But I also I have a hard time finding empathy for John here.
And just to make it very clear, I have no empathy for John other than the kind of vicious circle of abuse that he also lived through. And as a child, I would have had empathy for him. There is a lot more to say as you become an adult and a grown-up and you know what's right and what's wrong. But that's a whole other story. I don't have empathy for him in this case, but I'm saying I just find it interesting that the lean was there. We didn't get a partial story.
Yeah.
I think it works in this episode. I enjoyed it a lot. It's just something I kind of noted, and I'd like to come back to that at the full recap to see, is that something that went through to the end? Because actually, the very end of this episode, there was an interesting twist in the podcast when they're doing the teaser for episode 2. I was a little bit taken aback by that, because we hear a snippet from someone else who is noted as John's other girlfriend.
Yeah.
Who is in the clip we hear, she is saying it was Deven had the gun, Deven was shooting, he wanted me to pick him up and I said no, and then this happened. So we hear this other side of things. So we get this lean towards Deven throughout, and then we hear this other side, which I thought was a very interesting kind of pivot of things.
Yeah, and I guess we'll have to wait and see where that goes.
Yeah.
Essentially, there's a quick side note. I sometimes deliberately don't listen to the preview of the next episode because I know I'm going to listen to the next episode, and I don't know. I find them sometimes. I'm not saying this one is. I find them sometimes misleading or like maybe overly sort of salacious in a way that I'd rather just like listen to the episode as a whole and skip that.
That's a good point. I did listen to this one. It confused me, I have to say, but it also made me want to press play on episode 2 immediately, which I think is the point of a teaser, no?
That's 100% the point. Well, I I kind of grouped my other notes, the things that we haven't talked about in this episode, into a couple of buckets. I think, I don't know. Did you have a particular direction you wanted to go with this?
Yeah, I've two main things that I want to speak about this episode. So the first one, if you don't mind, like if we speak about the intro, I don't know how you felt about it, but I felt like I've really grown to appreciate the variety of intros we're hearing, and how much they can either hook or, really disengage me when I'm trying to listen. I have to go back and listen again and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Before I jump into what I have to say, were you hooked from the intro or were you not?
Yeah, so the intro, let's make sure we're talking about the same thing. Is the intro the part about the 40 years before?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So this is John's grandmother.
Mama Cat,
who was also in a domestic abuse situation, and she murdered her husband in the same place where we know that this crime will take place, which I thought it really effectively set the stage for this generational trauma, right? Like this is something that has haunted this place, this family, this area, going back at least 40 years, likely longer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree. I think the other aspect of it that I found very important, and I kind of alluded to it when we were speaking about the host, about Liz Flock, but this is the start of the vicious circle that is laid out. So I feel like we reference back to this vicious circle so much throughout this episode. It's spoken about when we talk about, obviously, with Mama Cat killing her husband on the same land where John is then killed. So Mama Cat is John's grandmother. Sorry, you already said that. Then we also hear about Deven and how her mother suffered with alcoholism.
Yeah.
And how Deven feels like that is why she has had such a hard time with alcohol. There's a lot of talk about how herself and John drink a lot, have fights a lot when they drink too much, and how they both struggle with alcoholism as well. That's another vicious circle that we hear about. And we hear about John, how John's mother went through experienced a lot of domestic violence as well as John was growing up. These are all very circular things. We're talking about this vicious cycle that happens with these cases and when children witness something traumatic like this.
Which, and I think to circle back to the point about the sort of the one-sidedness of the presentation, I hate to say like in the defense of the abuser in this case, but like in the sense of presenting some level of balance, like you recognize that this man is not just a monster who became a monster with no basis, right? Like all he's known is abuse, right? Like his grandfather, his father, were abusive to the women in their lives, and like that's the modeling that he had. That's the world he came up with. That's not an excuse for what he does. That doesn't make it okay, but it also like it gives you some level of understanding of this is. Yeah. So, and one thing that I don't think you mentioned, so they end up in Calera, Alabama. So he had fled there with his mom when he was 6 years old. He hadn't been back there. He had no relationship with his dad. His dad lives on that property. They go back to the property where his dad lives, but he hadn't been there. So he's 25 when they move back. So for almost 20 years, he had been away. And like, I don't know, the idea of taking, so at the time Deven is 19, he's 25, taking your girlfriend back to this property where you know this happened, right? This happened to your mom. This happened to your grandmother. I don't know. It's like I get, so the part we haven't talked about is why he does this, right? Like he's running. He's on the run from the police for a variety of crimes. And which, yeah, I mean, one of the things I list is just all of the red flags around John. We've touched on quite a few of them, but there's the other ones around sort of the crimes that he has committed and just sort of his general paranoia about being caught by the police. Yeah, what did you make of that?
I mean, I think it's hard. not to have questions. And like, episode 1 of any podcast, I think, is teeing up a lot of questions. I think it wants the listeners to have questions. So we don't know why Deven fell for him. We don't know how Deven's family thought about their relationship. We don't know what led her to run or to leave where she was with the safety of her family and go to Alabama.
That was something I wrote down, just like,
why
would she go? Why would he take her there? Why would he take, in this interracial relationship? Like, why? I don't know.
But sure, I feel like it's less of a question as to why he would do it. But presumably, I'm going to cast a lot of assumptions here, or presumptions. I don't really know the difference between the two. But anyway, I'm just going to tell how I felt about it in episode 1. John, we know, likes to abuse Deven physically and mentally and emotionally. So the one thing that he wants, likely, is control. So if he takes her from her family, he gains more control. If he takes her to somewhere where she is not as, I don't know, insert word. If he takes her to Alabama, then again, is he not upping his control bit by bit? So he brings her to the middle of nowhere. He's got the control. She doesn't. Whatever bit of control she had in the relationship before they left is gone by the time she gets there.
No, you're right. I think I'm searching for like the sort of like love in their relationship, and it's hard to see it through that. It's hard to understand. Like, it's hard. I'm trying to find a way to empathize with him, and I can't do it. Because once he gets there, like, it just escalates. I mean, it escalates over a series of years, but it escalates as it presented in this episode. I mean, there's some really significant things that lead up to the murder. I mean, really, I think starting on the bus ride down, like it's this 32-hour bus ride from upstate New York, where Deven observes him becoming like moody and distant as they go. And as soon as they get there, he has a fight with his dad, and then he turns around and beats up Deven. Like
It's so interesting. I think that's a good point. One of the first things I noticed on their journey down is she says, "It's so amazing. It was really nice on the journey. He got me my favorite chips."
Yeah.
That shouldn't be noteworthy.
No.
That's a red flag in itself. It shouldn't be noteworthy that he's bringing you your favorite snack to eat on this long journey. Second of all, when he gets there, you're right. He drinks with his dad and they end up having a fight, but he doesn't take it out on his dad. He takes it out on Deven.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure, like most abusers, he's probably not going to fight with someone he doesn't feel like he can win with or he has no control over. His dad had invited him down there to stay with them. Presumably if he fought with his dad would have kicked them out.
Well, and on top of that, I mean, the place they walk into, right? Like it's this rundown property. It's overgrown with like vines and stuff. The dad lives in a shack because the main house had burned down, and Deven describes it as having like 6-foot tall grass. The first couple of months they live in a tent, and then they get a trailer with no plumbing where she's cooking outside on a hot plate. She's washing dishes in a wheelbarrow. Like it sounds like she's effectively in some type of prison camp, right? Like this sounds like a prison. And it like I said, it escalates where he turns off and hides her phone from her. Like he traps her there essentially in this isolated property in an isolated place. Like you said, I mean, thousands of miles from her family, from her support system. She has no support system here. One of the other things I wanted to note is there's a point where he knocks out her front tooth, and eventually his aunt Sheila, who seems sympathetic to Deven, seems like she's formed some kind of bond with Deven. She takes her to the dentist eventually to get her tooth fixed, but she notes how she just doesn't ask questions. And it's almost like she knows that she didn't just fall down and her tooth fell out, but she doesn't want to get involved. Which is, we hear this from another person too. We hear this from their friend, Desi.
Desi, yeah.
Who is the wife of one of John's friend, who actually says how Deven and John were very passionate with one another. And she says, I wish my husband treated me like he treated her. Which I think just, you step back from that. It's like, that's the environment that they're in, which, yeah.
Just circling back to Aunt Sheila, like the thing I would say about the not asking questions, I feel like what I have heard from any time I'm listening to a podcast, a story, or from friends about anyone who's going through a hard time with their partner, or anyone who's been in an abusive or coercive relationship, if you ask too many questions, sometimes the person can shut down and you can push them away. And I think it's very easy in hindsight.
Sure.
And I think in a way, sometimes I felt maybe the host, Liz Flock, was saying nobody knew like how to deal with this, a little bit in a judgmental way. And I think stepping back from it is easy to say, these are the things she could have done. These are the things the family could have done. But maybe Aunt Sheila wanted to make sure that some form of relationship was allowed to withstand it. So she could still have a relationship with Deven. She didn't want to push Deven away. She didn't want John to push her away from Deven. So maybe that's what it is. It's not even just with Deven. She said that about her own children. She said, I don't ask questions. I just hope I've raised them well and they can talk to me if they need to. I know.
Yeah.
Jeff made a face for all of you listeners who cannot see
you're right.
it.
You're right.
I get it. I get the face. I understand. I'm just saying we have to remember that we're listening to this in hindsight.
That's true.
We have a lot more information than anyone in that circle had. And that's proven from what Desi said.
It is. Yes. She wouldn't have. Yeah, you're right.
She not last, but she said, can you believe that I used to think, why can't my husband treat me the way John treats Deven?
No, you're right. You're absolutely right.
The last time I'm going to bring up a circle in this episode is I felt the intro and the outro. The intro comes in with the 911 call that Deven makes. And then the outro, it re-says it. I felt like that whole theme of the circle was really there. It starts with the 911 call, and very close towards the end, we have the 911 call again. And we have a couple of people on John's side who are spoken to, and Sheila is one of them, who says nobody was upset with her after we heard the whole story. Nobody was upset with Deven after we heard the whole story. They empathized with her. They were not upset with her. I thought that was a really interesting way to kind of pull things towards the end. And then they speak about how Deven was sentenced to 15 years in prison. And they compare it to what we heard at the start about Mama Cat. Mama Cat her trial was short and sweet, as how it was described. And it was deemed that she killed him in self-defense.
Yeah.
Which is an interesting end. It goes back to something that you've already said about race. It does raise that question because Mama Cat was white. Mama Cat was from the area.
Yeah.
Deven was an outsider. Deven was black. And that's how it ends it.
Yeah, I think that was it was with a powerful ending. It did form that nice circle. It also definitely made me want to listen past it because it raises as many questions as it answers. Like we get a lot of information. Like we know what happened to Deven. We know that she was denied the stand your ground defense. She took the blind plea. She got the 15-year sentence. She was 25 years old when that happens. We hear a little bit about also how blind pleas are this somewhat obscure legal term that legal experts that the host talked to didn't know much about them. They're mostly in the South, but they're rare. this definitely does make me want to find out more about how we ended up here. I want to hear more about the backstory. I also want to hear like we know that Liz is talking to Deven while Deven's in prison. I want to hear more from Deven, right? I want to get more of that story. We get a fair amount of that here. I'm definitely interested to hear more about that. One thing we didn't touch on too is that Deven and John had a little girl who was I think about 2 or 3 years old at the time of the shooting, and I'm curious to hear more about that. What happened to her? So, yeah.
Jeff, did you read the episode titles?
No, I don't think I did.
I accidentally did.
Oh, the
and I
next
don't
ones.
usually.
Are there spoilers?
There are spoilers.
Well, there's no spoilers in this episode, Dee.
No, I know. For anyone who doesn't want a spoiler, do not look at the episode titles. I would not suggest it.
That's okay. That's a good piece of advice. Thank you for that public service announcement. Can I say before we wrap this up, one last thing that's just sort of very tangential to any of the story. I want to end on a little bit of a tangent.
Is it a poem?
No, it's not a poem. It's the ads.
They were so badly chosen. Like, I'm like, take your money wherever you're getting it. But seriously?
So Lemonada Media seems like they do some really interesting podcasts, including this one. But they also have a lot of celebrity podcasts. So
yeah.
And the way the podcast is structured, just from like a production standpoint, is it'll go quiet. And sometimes it'll go quiet for just a few seconds. Then Liz Flock will come back in and the story will continue. But sometimes it'll go quiet. And then Julia Louis-Dreyfus pops in, all chipper and upbeat, talking about her podcast where she talks to older women, which sounds like a great podcast. I've heard good things about it. Or Penn Badgley will talk about remembering cringy moments from when you were a teenager and how we all feel like that. And I'm sorry, Penn Badgley, that's just so tonally different from what we've just been listening to. Or David Duchovny also has one that,
It's not something we've really spoken about before, but it really stands out in this one. I totally agree. The shift is interesting. My only thought when I'm trying to look at the positive spin on it is that because this podcast is quite heavy, that maybe the producers are thinking, throw some light podcasts in there. People will want to listen to them more after listening to this because this is so heavy. But it didn't make me want to listen to them because you're in this state of like, whoa, this is hard. This is a lot. Poor Deven. Everyone's suffering. What about the daughter? You've all of these questions coming up, and then you're, hi, did you see me on blah, blah, blah? And you're like, no, thank you. I need a moment.
And I love Julia Louis-Dreyfus. I think she's wonderful. But yeah, and I know that she had nothing to do with this. Liz Flock had nothing to do with this. Not their fault. It's just someone somewhere put these two things together, and I wish they hadn't done it this way.
Yeah, agreed.
All right, Dee. Should we get to our question of the week?
Let's do it. This is really exciting, Jeff, because this is the first time our question of the week has come from a listener who emailed us in. If you have a question, or if you just have thoughts and opinions about the podcast or any of the stories that we have covered, please email us in at somuchcrime@gmail.com.
So our question is from Dr. Jack. He asks us, how do you pick the podcasts that you cover?
Ooh, really interesting. Do you want to start?
Well, I can talk about how we picked this one. I guess that's most topical. I think in general, I feel like we try to pick something that is different than what we've picked before. I think we try to have a range of stories. I think we try to find some podcasts that maybe are a little bit lesser known if we can. You know, we try to cover cases that maybe aren't as famous so that people can learn about some new things in the true crime space. I think from my perspective, as we talked about in past episodes, like I'm interested in just sort of having a kind of a diverse landscape of not just the same type of crimes over and over again, which I think we've done a pretty good job of over our episodes to date. But I think this one jumped out at me because it's fairly recent. It came out last year, 2023, and I mean the title "Blind Plea" is, I mean, it was about kind of, it's a legal term, and it's a legal term I'd never heard of, and I was curious about kind of how race plays a role in the story. I think those are some of the main things. I was curious to hear a story about kind of a legal situation, and it also, I think one other thing about this one, it was a case where instead of a woman getting murdered, it's about a woman murdering a man. So just kind of a role reversal. Yeah, just in kind of our ongoing interest to find different stories.
We also have tried to focus in on crimes from different areas. Alabama is not somewhere we've spoken about yet. It's not somewhere I know that much about either. So we do try to jump around the place a little bit geographically.
Yeah, which, I mean, so far we've been, I wouldn't say all over the world, but we've definitely touched on some stories from I mean, we've done Australia is maybe the farthest away we've gone from like the US, or a lot of like kind of UK, Ireland stories. Is that it so far?
Did we do? Oh, we did. Yeah.
We did go to Suriname in Filthy Rituals.
We did. We also went to North Korea.
That's right. We had a little bit of North Korea in Pongsu.
Yeah. So that is our aim here, is to bring podcasts that are lesser known. I think we've done that somewhat. We've also reviewed some that we really wanted to talk about that were pretty well known, like The Retrievals. So yeah. As always, if you have any recommendations, let us know on Instagram. Send us a message on Instagram, comment on any of our posts, or just send us an email on somuchcrime@gmail.com.
Yeah. Thanks for listening.
Before we talk about our next episode, are you enjoying So Much Crime, So Little Time?
If so, please take a moment to rate us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen. You can do it right now.
Share that knowledge with your friends, your families, your frenemies, your enemies, your colleagues, everyone that you meet on the street.
I really don't understand why you think people have so many enemies that they talk to about their podcast choices.
That's a good point.
Do you have a lot of enemies that you talk to about podcasts with? And wait, am I your enemy?
I don't think I have any. I don't think I have any enemies that I speak to.
Has this been a trick this whole time, and I'm actually your enemy? You just like talking to enemies about podcasts? Did we just discover something here?
We did.
Okay.
Every day's a school day.
Anyway, please tell whoever you choose to speak with. That's up to you at your discretion. We really appreciate it.
On our next episode, we'll do a full recap of Blind Plea.
We'll go much deeper into Deven's life story and how she ended up with John in Alabama.
And we'll learn more about the blind plea she took, what it is, and why it's so controversial.
Plus, we'll hear about what happened to Deven after her trial and where she is now.
That's next time on So Much Crime,
So Little Time. So Much Crime, So Little Time is a production of Mind Glove Media. The executive producer is Paxton Caloriso. Our associate producer is Blythe Ty. Our theme music was composed by Vyacheslav Starostin. If you haven't done it yet, please subscribe to this show on your podcast app. And don't forget to give us a 5-star rating and a review. Even better, tell your friends. To join the discussion, look for us on social media. Check out the show notes for all the links. Thanks for listening.